This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our new year,
That all of them
2023.
were messed up.
Oh, there we go. And we're just taking a few minutes, kind of letting everybody into the room. We know that everybody has your day's been anything like ours. It's been a little crazy and very, very busy. So if you don't mind, if you would just take a moment in the chat, let us know who's here, where you're from. And I just know that I would love to see if you have something that is going on in your district or your school that is just something you want to brag on for a moment, something positive. We would love to see that as well. I think we all could see some fun things going on. So feel free to drop that in. We won't call anybody out unless you just really want us to. But if you would do that for us real quick, kind of gives us, Sharon and I, something to kind of see. I know we tend to get called with when everything's going wrong. And so it's nice to see when things are going well so we can find out more about that and help you get the good word out about all of the wonderful things that you're doing. So let me get my chat opened up. All right. Wow, we've got a big group today, and I know that there's a lot of people that have different questions going on. So if you have questions about anything dealing with RSA, if you want to drop those in the chat, Sharon, my colleague, the elementary ELA director, is monitoring our chat, and we'll make sure that we get to anything there that we can possibly do on this call, or help make sure that I follow up if there's something that we are not able to address today. We do have our running agenda meeting, so let me get that here where you can get to it if you need to. Does not change. There we go. And we still have people signing in. I'm kind of stalling a little bit so that we can make sure everybody gets in okay. Try that one more time so we can see if it's a live link. There we go. All right. So if you will recall, on our running agenda, we keep this going so that we have information from the past so that you also are able to go back and look at things. We try to get everything on there. So, but just so you know too, if you're not, I think by now most of you know who we are. My name's Melissa Algrim. I'm our Reading Sufficiency Director, and with Sharon, our Elementary ELA Director. Brenda is taking a much needed vacation, and we also have some name and contact information for our colleagues in special education, Kristen Perez-Ripples and Alexa Hudick, because sometimes we all know that what we're doing with reading sufficiency overlaps sometimes into special education, and we're needing to have their expertise as well. And then, as always, Dylan Savage is our reporting specialist, administrative assistant that is able to help us out with so many things, if nothing else, to knock on our doors and say, hey, we've got somebody that you need to talk to get it taken care of. So that information. So with our agenda today, just have a few things that we want to address and make sure that we have opportunities for questions. One, on screening and reporting, I know is on everybody's mind right now as we are working on mid-year screening and getting kindergartners taken care of, as well as wrapping up screening for characteristics of dyslexia. I have had several ask about mid-year reports. Remember that we do not do a mid-year report. That information is entered at the end of the year on that end of year report. So take an easy breath if you are responsible for reporting. You do not have something that you need to get taken care of right now. So nobody's behind, which is all a good thing. On the subject of report, this is not on our agenda, but just so I can say this, our third grade promotion retention report, which is located on the way, was due back in October 31st. Everybody did it, and we know everybody did it because we double checked and triple checked and called you and bugged you until you did it. However, we've had several administrators call here in the last few days saying that they've gone through and just double checked, and it is now showing is not completed. It's doing that for everybody. We have your data. Please don't panic. This is not something that you are behind on. If your administrator says, we didn't do this report, yes, you did. For some reason, it has reset. So just so you have that, don't worry about that, but it's taken care of. Nobody is outstanding on any reports at this time. We are done until May, okay? So speaking of that, we will have the end of year report open at the end of April. It is due May 31st. That's our last report for the school year. There will be some adjustments on this report that we wanted to make sure that you were aware of so that you could start making sure that you have that data gathered now. With the passage of the dyslexia screening bill that went into effect this year, there is also a stipulation that there would be data collected from districts about that screening. And so I put in bullet points exactly what it says that we would have to report out. So going through and making sure that we have by grade level, kindergarten through third grade, the number of students who were screened for characteristics of dyslexia in this school year. So if they were just plain screened, we'll have a number, just like what we do with our universal screening. It'll say kindergarten, we screened 50 students in kindergarten, and in first grade, we screened 50 students. So just like that. We will also need to identify the number of students in each of those grade levels who were newly identified as having characteristics of dyslexia in that school year. Please don't worry about the word newly. Basically, if through that screening, we identified that they had characteristics of dyslexia, then we are going to put the number of those students too. So if we screened 50 kindergarten students and 25 kindergarten students showed as they had characteristics of dyslexia with that screening, that's what we will be entering in. So just that straight number by grade level for the site. You will also just identify the screening assessment used to evaluate that student progress. So if you used STAR CBM, there will be a drop down just like we do for the universal screener. If you used FAST or iStation, those types of things, you will just identify the assessment that you used for that screening requirement, the number of trained school system personnel used to administer the dyslexia screening tool. In your school, who administered the dyslexia screening? So we know in some schools, it was all of the classroom teachers. So however many classroom teachers K through 3 that worked on that. If you had 12 of those teachers, then you'll put 12 down. It's just simply a number. You're not having to list names. If you in your school had just the reading specialist administer that screening and that was the only person doing it, you'll put 1 down in that area. And we'll go over all this again, but I just wanted to start kind of getting this in your heads now so that you could start thinking along this lines. A number of students in K through 3 who were participating in interventions within the school setting, and the number in those grades participating in interventions outside of the school setting. This in particular is what's going to take you a little bit of time to gather. And so why we wanted to give you an early heads up. So in this area, there will be 2 rows, and you'll say in kindergarten, we had, let's say 25 students who were receiving intervention, and they were all receiving intervention in the school setting. And so you'd put the number 25 right there. That would mean these are students who are getting that reading intervention. They're on a reading plan. They may be working with the classroom teacher. They may be working with a special education teacher, a reading specialist. Again, that's dependent on the needs of the student and how the school has chosen to address those needs. Then there will be a second row that lists, again, those grade levels again, and how many of these students are getting intervention outside of the school setting. So for example, if again, not provided by the school, so maybe the family is taking them to a reading tutor. This is going to rely on just asking for those students who are on a reading plan. And there is a place on our current IPRI that says we're getting intervention outside, just asking the parents, are you taking them to a tutoring service, or are they going somewhere else? Things like that. We're just trying to get the best idea if possible. Obviously, you can only report what you know. So please don't let this be a stressor for you. We need to ask families, but if families don't disclose that information, obviously you can only report what you have the information of. So And then the last bullet that we are required to report under this new legislation is the programs used by districts for intervention within the school setting. That was already reported on the annual district reading plan this last fall, so there's nothing that you will need to do for that. So all we're looking at are these first 5 bullets, and those are simply numbers that you will be reporting out. Okay, so not down to the student level, not having to deal with specific names or anything like that. Outside school setting includes school tutoring. That's a great question. I know that's going to come up. That's still a school setting. So it's still something, after school tutoring is still provided by the school. But let us get a very firm answer on that, and we will make sure that we have that in writing for you for our next meeting to make sure that we are being very clear, because I know that can be seen either way, and we want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So thank you for asking that question. On the topic still of screening and reporting, I just like to keep these links here. They've been here the last couple of times, but it's nice to have them at our fingertips. Remember our implementation guidance for early literacy screening. A lot of the questions that we have been receiving lately around screening, we've been able to refer to a specific page in this guidance. So if there's something that you're having a question about, sometimes you might be able to find a quick answer that way. Or we can make sure that you have that in writing there. Obviously, our technical guidance from our screeners that we've talked about, I'm not going to go over each of those again. I know that we're pretty familiar. The question that we have been getting recently, and we know that we get this periodically, is that we might have a screening assessment, one that came up, I think just this morning, where on our technical guidance that's published, we're saying that benchmark, that grade level target score right now, let's say is a 170. I'm going to make a number up because I can't remember what it was on that particular one. 170, but when they're looking at the report, it shows 169 in kind of that area. Those numbers are given to us by the vendor. So a couple of things to look out for. We ask the vendors for their national norms. Sometimes though, when you're pulling up a report from your particular screener, it's showing local or state norms. And so sometimes there's a little bit of a variance because of that. We asked for national norms to ensure consistency from district to district and from year to year, because that uses a larger base for students to determine that. That gives us a bit more of a consistent number rather than, especially for a newer screener where they're still establishing norms, sometimes that number moves around a little bit more. So that's one thing to check on. But if there is some variance there, just feel free to give us a call. We'll help you walk through about, in that specific situation, how to address that. But those usually are pretty correct with that 40th percentile according to their national norms.
Melissa,
yes.
were you planning on sharing? You're not sharing your screen. Were you intending
to
be?
Thank you for saying
sorry.
that.
So thank you for putting that in the chat. I'm looking at it over here. I wasn't thinking about it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't get that a little sooner.
I'm telling you, it's been a day.
It has.
It's been a day. So let me come back up here so you can see we've got all of these things right here that I have just been prattling on about without you being able to see. I am sorry about that.
Me too. I didn't
No, thanks for interrupting me on that. Okay, so are we able to see that now? Perfect. Okay, and then finally we have here our link for our family letter for characteristics of dyslexia. We've had a few people say that they are having a difficult time finding that. So let me just point out real fast on our RSA coordinator page. This is the page that I consistently refer to for these types of things. You will scroll down past this where you see family communication, because we are communicating with families, and you'll see it right there in bold, that family information and resources for dyslexia. Okay. But if you are having a hard time finding that there, you can also find the direct link right here and just download it and save it where you can find it quickly for you. Okay. All right. So Sharon, I know the chat was pretty busy. I don't know how much of that was people signing in and how much was questions. So I'm going to turn that over to you for a moment.
Okay, we just had a few questions, still letting some people in. So we are still working through the process of about alternative assessments for 3rd grade, correct? That was one of the questions.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay, I'm so sorry. Let me go down. Okay, if a student was below benchmark on STAR, but green on dyslexia, and then they were below benchmark in the middle of the year, do we need to screen them for dyslexia again?
No,
Okay.
no. You only, so couple of things on that. One, if they are below that benchmark on the universal screener, but they don't flag for characteristics of dyslexia, that means that they have a reading difficulty, but they are not flagging with those particular skills. So there's some other areas where they need support. The legislation only requires that we assess that student once that year. If you would like to administer again, if there's something there that's saying we do need more data, there's nothing preventing you from doing more, but it is not a requirement, not an expectation.
Okay, and remind us if we have a student that goes below benchmark in the middle of the year, where are they? Are they on the end of the year report?
Yes.
Okay.
So remember, on the end of the year report, it will preload what you entered on your beginning of year report with the number of students that were at risk. And then by grade level, you will enter in how many students were added to a plan or entered the program, how many students exited and or were basically left the school, who moved away and you no longer can do anything about. And then how many students are still considered at risk at the end of the year. And then from that, it will auto calculate. You'll enter in how many students are no longer at risk, that were on a plan but no longer at risk. And then it will auto calculate how many students are still a concern. Okay, so let me repeat those again, since I had a little bit of a flub in there. It will automatically load by what you entered on your beginning of year report, what you started with at the beginning of year with your students who were at risk by grade level. And then you will enter the number of students that you added to a plan after that beginning of year window, whether you added them in October or January or February or March, or they moved in to the school and had a plan, or they were just already here all along and you needed to add them. That's where you're going to enter them, is on that entered column. And then there's a column that says exited, and that's the students that left your building that you are no longer responsible for. You can't do anything about. They may have gone to another school in your district. They may have gone to another district, moved out of state, decided to become homeschooled, moved to a private school, but they are no longer physically in your building. And then the third column that you'll enter in is how many students are that were on a plan are now reading at grade level, who are where they need to be. They no longer needed to be on a plan, whether they were on grade level at the end of the year, or whether they were taken off the plan at mid-year because they've made great progress and are showing that they no longer need those extra supports. But regardless, how many are there? And then it will auto calculate how many of these students are we still concerned about. Okay.
And if I'm interpreting this question a little bit, but if the parent or teacher requested dyslexia screening, I'm going to assume that maybe they didn't qualify for it, but it was requested. Do they still include that on the report?
You still, because of that, you would include that on the end of year report on number of students that we screened for dyslexia. Okay, not necessarily that were at risk according to that universal, but remember at the beginning we talked about number of students that we screened for dyslexia. So back in my example, like I said, we had 50 students in this grade level that were at risk that we screened for dyslexia, but we had 5 parent requests, so it would be 55 now that we've screened for dyslexia. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. and so going from that way. So I think I just answered that question.
I mean, I think so. And I kind of interpreted it. So if that's not correct, put it in the chat. Maybe review again what outside tutoring is. That even if it's at the school, but it's outside school hours, maybe we just need to clarify.
I think we're going to clarify that in February, and we are
Okay.
going to have some very specific instances in writing, and we will put that on a piece of paper you can print and have next to you when you're thinking of that, and share with your administration. I think that would probably make the most sense rather than us trying to talk through that right now. Because as I'm kind of looking through some of the questions in the chat and thinking of the questions we've been asked, it could really get into the weeds. And I want to make sure that that is in writing for us to refer to so we can be consistent.
There's a question about letters. We don't have any more letters cohorts planned at this time. There might be in the future, but we don't have any plans right now.
Yeah, right now that's going to be up to with our new administration that's just started this week. What we don't know what those plans are right now. So we always hope we can do more.
Yeah, we do. Was there a STAR CBM flow chart added to the state website?
So let me come back over here. It's been on here.
Okay.
Under the STAR CBM, it's just a little bit harder to find. If you'll go to that STAR CBM technical guidance, you'll see this direct guidance and grade level flow charts at the bottom of this very first page. Take a moment and pull that up just so you can see what you're looking at. Okay, if you'll scroll down, this is what Renaissance has had put together at our request, and so you can kind of see, let's see, kind of who's doing what. There's our flow chart that we were looking at when we talked about a flow chart right there. Okay, that's students from grades 2 through 3, grades K through 1. So you have that visual right there. So again, if you're looking for that on that STAR CBM technical guidance, if you'll scroll down to this after the general information, the link is right there at the bottom of page 2. Okay.
And there was a question about a cadence. I think we were looking into
with this spelling. Okay, and Sarah, I apologize. You are on my list. We have been begging them to ask because there's a whole story about that we probably don't want to get into right now. But yes, they're on my list to continue to call. We've been calling just about every day trying to get that answer for you as well. So I am very sorry. It's just not something that we have the answer for you right now. We're waiting on the vendor to give that for us. So but yes, I do have you right here on my post-it note on the very top. Okay, and are we still sharing our screen?
You are still sharing.
Okay, just double checking. All right, anything else with that for right now? 40% is 40% on national norm, Chantel. That's our grade level target for the 40th percentile. All right.
There's kind of one at the end. Kay, I would say based on if you have a student in tier 3, based on your testing, if you feel like they should be in tier 2, it would be appropriate to move them.
Yeah, so on our implementation guidance, it has some things for consideration of where they should, as far as tier 2 or tier 3 intensity, but those are simply recommendations. Those ultimately comes down to a decision made by the school. And tier 2 or tier 3 would be, we're referring to the intensity of intervention. So tier 3 is more intense than tier 2, which means by intensity, we mean smaller group size, more frequently meeting for longer periods of time, maybe having a specialized teacher with maybe more specialized training. Those types of things cause the intensity to increase for an intervention. So again, we have on that implementation guidance some things for consideration, but there's always going to be some exceptions. And so it really is a decision best made at the local level of exactly what that student needs. What we would not want to see is like putting everybody at tier 3, because that is beyond the capacity, I think, of any school to be able to handle. That's a pretty intensive program that not everyone needs, but we also don't want to have everybody just doing the same thing. That's what we do in core tier 1 instruction. But we have different varying levels of needs. So that 3rd grade student who is working at a 2nd grade level does not need as an intensive intervention as that student working on kindergarten skills in 3rd grade.
Let's see, you want to clarify on the end of year report, exiting is only those students that leave the school, not those that met benchmark? Correct,
Gina. So the students that met benchmark at middle of year, you're going to say these are the kids that have completed their plan. That's a celebration. We want to be able to celebrate those kiddos. Exit would be simply those students that you no longer have any control or record of. Okay, I'm going to keep on going. And Sharon, if you
Go
are
ahead.
still
Nope.
scanning, if we see any
Yep.
other things that we need to come back to, I'm sure you'll let me know. The RSA allocation that went out to districts on December 13th. Those funds were paid in full. So if you will recall, or if you're new to RSA, state aid has deposited those funds into your account. This is not a claims process. This is the funding that you have to go forth and spend. But spend for the correct things, please. The total funds allocated by the legislature for RSA this year was $13 million. That is an increase last year. It was 12 million last year. So they did invest an additional $1 million into this, into our early literacy. The per pupil allocation this year was $133.88. So if you had 10 students that were considered at risk in K through 3, you would have received $1,338.80. So just kind of going along those lines. Those specific allocation amounts for your district, if you don't know where that is, it is on single sign-on, and there's a state aid management system application. If you do not personally have access to that, check with your financial person at your district. They will have that access and can let you know. Remember that the way we track RSA funding when we are asked about that is through those OCAS codes. So in OCAS, or our Oklahoma Cost and Accounting System, when we make an expenditure for RSA, it is under Project 367. And then there are different codes with subjects and all of those fun things that lets us know what you spend it on. So if we're looking at how many districts or how much of this money was spent on professional development versus how much was spent on books or supplies or on staffing. And so it gives us a bigger picture idea of how those funds are being expended, and our legislators do ask for that information. So we do want to make sure that we're coding that money correctly so that we can get an idea, because we want to make sure that we can let them know how this is being used. Remember that the purpose of our RSA funds is to provide support for our K through 3 students who are struggling with reading. This does sometimes extend up through 4th and 5th grade for those students who are still falling under those requirements, if they've been promoted with an exemption or with any kind of probation. So all funds should have a direct effect on student reading. So some of our examples that we give are things like helping with a tutor or an interventionist, providing that qualified person to help that student learn, using the intervention materials, whether it's books, curriculum, sometimes it's even making the copies or printing something if we're using an online program, or maybe some sheets for them to help work with those manipulatives that will help, like those little magnetic letters or things along those lines. Software programs that are designed to help with those early reading skills are also fine and dandy to be able to use. Things that do not have a direct effect on student reading, rugs for students to sit on. That's something that we have been asked about quite often, is can we get rugs for our students? Smart boards, tablets, and computers. While they can be useful tools, do not have that direct effect on reading, and with our limited funds for RSA is really not the best expenditure of those funds. And so we do not generally approve the hardware selections. Now, one exception would be maybe something that comes along with, I had a call yesterday, somebody's using one of the screening programs that requires the student to speak into a microphone. And so getting a headset with a microphone so that you can use the screening assessment that you've chosen. That makes sense to do that. You need to be able to use that. That's a lot different cost and use-wise than buying iPads for every single student in the classroom to be able to take an assessment. That needs to come from another funding source. There is an approved funding checklist for your reference. Just that last blurb there, just what we were just talking about with the laptops and tablets and the computer hardware. Any questions there about funding or anything that we need to pick up from screening, Sharon?
Can you use funds for CALP training for teachers?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
And if you're
Yeah.
not aware, CALP is Certified Academic Language Practitioner. And there's also CALT, which is
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Certified Academic Language Therapist. So there's two of those. Those would be training for, intensive training for teachers that can help with your students that are probably at a tier 3 level. So yes, that's appropriate. All right, anything else? Okay. Oh, so we do have that approved list for, and actually that's the next thing on our agenda, knowing that we do have this year that requirement for if you receive more than $2,500 in funding for RSA, that 10% of those funds is spent on professional development in the science of reading. So for example, if you received $3,500, then $350 are spent towards professional development. We do have a very brief guidance document linked here. It's also on the website. And there is that table on our coordinator page. There's our guidance right there. And remember, we have our table that shows what has been reviewed. These programs were submitted for review and approved this last spring. There's 50 programs currently there. We are in the process of getting a request for information out. There's been some internal processes that have hung that up a little longer than we had anticipated. But our understanding is that that's getting resolved. So we're able to get that out here pretty soon so that we can add more to this list. But until that goes out from our purchasing department, we can't add anything here yet. So that's what we are waiting on. But we do anticipate having quite a few things more added to that, because I know we've had a lot of vendors asking questions. And I also know that several districts have asked vendors to submit for that. So that will be out. And if you have some vendors that you're wanting to make sure get to that list or have an opportunity to be on that list for review, then please make sure that you let your rep know. We will probably send out an announcement when this review is open, just so that our schools can help us solicit those vendors to make sure that we are getting a good, robust list of professional development opportunities for our teachers. There is a rubric that the review team does go by. We do have teachers that participate on this review team. It's from across our state, and it's a pretty objective review. So there's some specific things that have to be included to be on this list, and there's some things that we request not to be included, so that we're making sure that we are only using effective practices in this programming. So,
and there was a question about, so if you're doing letters training for free through the state, you need to either find something else for professional development, but you could also pay stipends
correct,
for after hours using this money.
Whether it's letters, which is free, or any other of these offerings, if you have teachers doing work outside of their contract time, you may give them a stipend, and that can contribute towards that 10%. If for some reason anybody is having to travel, I don't know that right now there's any of that what's currently on the list, but anything that would be on that approved list that would be associated with that training would be reasonable to say that goes towards that 10%. Okay. Could it be for subs for teachers doing letters during contract time? Absolutely. That contributes to that teacher being able to effectively participate in that professional development, whether it's subs during the school day, stipends outside of the school day. If they are, I know with letters, the materials are provided for them, and that's generally the case, but sometimes there is a book that is not there that would be an additional, that would be perfectly fine as well. So, okay. All righty. And let me put that agenda link in the chat again. Oh, you've got it. Okay. No, you're good. Okay, so real quick, as we are moving towards our second semester, wanted to kind of get our heads wrapped around too, as we get up towards the end of the year, The promotion retention question that always comes up, kind of what's happening there, especially for our friends on the call who may be a little bit newer to RSA. So we want to make sure that you're aware of the resources we have for you. And then those of us that have been doing it for quite a long time, there's always some good reminders because sometimes we're operating under old assumptions. So our testing timeline on the state testing program, I did check with our assessment office this morning, and they gave us the windows for the computer-based testing and the paper-based testing, depending on what you're using for your school or those particular students. They do not yet have the date for the release of preliminary RSA data. As soon as they get that to us, I will make sure that it gets to you so you'll know kind of how to plan for that. Last year, it was about mid-May, May 17th, around in there somewhere, I believe, that we were able to get that preliminary data. And so we could start having conversations with families or making some decisions or enacting some of the decisions that might have already needed to be made. Just that reminder that if a third grade student does not participate in the OSTP, they are out that entire time. They have a month-long flu, or the parent says we are opting out of the test, or whatever is happening. Then one of those other pathways, either through the screener, the exemption, or the student reading proficiency team, will need to be used and documented so that we can promote how they were going to fourth grade. Okay. We do have a flow chart here. It's a little bit fuzzy. I'm sorry, it's not as high quality as I usually like, but I will make sure that you have access to it. Get it, we can see all in one screen. I believe we also have this on the RSA website too. That's something just handy to keep around. But you'll remember that we have 4 pathways for promotion from third grade to fourth grade. The first pathway, which most of our students meet this, is that the student meets that RSA criteria on the state test. If you will recall, our third grade students receive 2 scores on their ELA test. They have the RSA criteria, which shows as met or does not meet. And then they have their proficiency level, which would be below basic, basic, proficient, or advanced. Remember that the 2 do not line up perfectly. So when we're talking about promotion retention decisions, you are just looking at that RSA criteria column. If it says that they met RSA criteria, they're eligible for automatic promotion to fourth grade. The question has come up is, well, we were planning on retaining that student, or the parent has requested that we retain that student. That's perfectly fine. That is a school choice. That is not under state law at that point. Okay. So you would follow the same procedure that you would follow in any other grade level for retention if that were the case. Okay. If the student does not meet RSA criteria, the next thing to consider would be that second pathway. How have they done on one of the approved universal screeners? The dyslexia screener will not come into effect here. Okay, we're talking about the universal screener. So this will not change. That dyslexia screener does not change how we have operated in the past. So on one of those approved screeners, the universal screener, remember we have 10 of them, when they meet that grade level target for the end of year third grade at any time, then they are eligible for promotion to the fourth grade. Now, just like what we set up here, if we have a student that met the grade level target, but the school wanted to recommend retention, you would do the same thing that you would do as you would in any other grade if you were recommending retention. It would not be under state law. So what you would not want to say to a parent is your child has to be retained. What you would say is, your child has demonstrated this, but we don't feel that this is an accurate representation of their ability, or that this is, those types of things. And this is what we recommend. And you move forward as if they were in first grade, fourth grade, whatnot. If they do not meet that grade level target for the end of year for third grade, and they've not met that on the OSTP, then consider if they are eligible for one of these 7 good cause exemptions. And those are pretty tightly defined. And then if they don't meet any of those exemptions, then at that time, a student reading proficiency team would meet. And that team would then determine what are the needs of the student and how would they best be met. Would they best be met? Can we continue the intervention Maybe they've been making really good progress and they just have a little bit further to go. And we think we can do that in fourth grade, or do they need to have additional time in third grade with that third grade material while still receiving that intervention? Okay. Please remember that retention is not just simply a repetition of that grade level, but it's that repeating that core curriculum with that grade level while also receiving some really targeted, intensive intervention, regardless of their screening score at the beginning of their second year in that repeated grade. Because a lot of times we'll find that student is retained and their benchmark score seems to be kind of high at the beginning of the year because they're a year older than their peers. But regardless of what that score is, they still need to be able to have that intervention. We need to find out what those gaps are that cause that child to be retained. We know with reading, more time, simply more time, will not help that child learn to read. Okay, that has been proven over and over and over again. They have to have that direct instruction. So if they are having to repeat that grade, there are some gaps there, and it's our responsibility to find out what those gaps are and make sure we're using that time to fill in those gaps. So if you're looking at pathway 2 and you're trying to figure out what's that end of your third grade target, remember that is located on our screener specific technical guidance. When you open that up, there's that chart on the back page of every single one of them. And there's a big yellow number that says this is the end of your target for third grade. But we have it right here as well so that you have a quick reference. Okay. So remember, these are the standard scores. All of these standard scores were reported to us by the vendor as aligning with the 40th percentile. Okay, so if you're looking at 40th percentile, then the vendor has said that the 40th percentile aligns with, on FastBridge, a standard score of 503. Notice that standard scores vary wildly. That's why we use percentiles, because that's a more consistent way of talking about what we're looking at across 10 different types of assessments. With math reading fluency, which is a new one this year, there is a specific flag for students. So if they do not have the flag and they have a standard score, that would be their grade level target for the end of third grade. For the good cause exemptions, I just went ahead and wrote these out and made sure that you had the documentation that was needed there as well. A couple that I like to point out, exemption 2 and exemption 5 both address students receiving special education services. And a lot of our schools get these mixed up. Exemption 2 are for those students who, through their IEP, take the Oklahoma Alternate Assessment Program, or the OAP. These are our students that have more, usually some developmental help, some things like that. They are not taking the OSTP because they're taking an alternate form of the assessment. Exemption 5 would be for those students who receive special education services but are still taking the OSTP. They are usually serviced in a general education classroom for a large part of their day, and it would be expected that they can still do some of the activities that would be required of them on the OSTP. Do keep in mind that this did change a couple of years ago, that it says that students who are on an IEP that addresses reading or language skills, and that the student has received that intensive remediation in reading and has made adequate progress toward IEP goals. It is not required that that student have a previous years of retention, okay? But it is required that they're making adequate progress. Adequate progress would be determined by the IEP team. There are several times where the team has determined that adequate progress was not being made and this exemption did not apply. That is a decision that is made at the local level. Okay, so just keep in mind that is there. Exemption 6 also received, had a change a couple of years ago. It's students who have been previously retained once, not twice. It was twice a couple of years ago. Now it's students who have been previously retained once. Okay, questions, Sharon, about any of this?
Okay, can you address the change in STAR between the 696 and 670?
I'm gonna come back.
I'm sorry, 969 and 970. There was
So that
there was that change. When did that happen? Maybe they rained a
There
worm.
at the very beginning of the year, if you were using 969 and that was there at the very beginning. Yeah, Renaissance informed us, and I believe it was when we were trying to get things straightened out with the dyslexia screener as well. They said, oh, and by the way, our norms have changed. So we went ahead and reflected the new numbers because we wanted this to be representative of what the vendor has stated, because it's their research that we're going off of. Okay. So it would be right there towards the beginning of the year, but it might have been right in the middle of that beginning of year window. So if there was, if we didn't catch that, I'm very, very sorry. And if that's causing a particular problem, please contact me individually and we can talk through that and figure out how to best address that. Okay, anything else, Sharon?
I mean, I think that's about it. If I missed one,
Okay.
then put it in the chat again for me.
Okay. And we do always save these chats, and if we need to go back through and address some of these, we use the chats to kind of help formulate our agenda for the next time. Just be aware, because we know sometimes there's some questions that we're needing to make sure that we're getting, and if we need to address people individually. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry, there was one that I missed. Should an EL student that is still within the first 2 years be on an IPRI?
Yes, they should. It will align right now with, it should align with their LIEP goals or their English learning goals. So that their English learner may be the intervention, or English learning teacher may be the interventionist for that student. That would be perfectly fine. But right now, the way the law is written, there is not an exemption for those kids from the RSA requirements. Okay, we cannot leave a meeting without giving you some resources and professional development ideas, because this is Sharon and my favorite part of these meetings, is to be able to share some things that we discovered. There's a couple of states that have recently shared some information that they had that we thought would be nice for our teachers to be aware of. Massachusetts provided some charts for some skills, foundational skills instructions, which we thought would be really helpful, especially when we're thinking about some of these foundational skills. And when is it that we're explicitly teaching them? And when is it that we might be reinforcing or even introducing some of these concepts in pre-K through 3. Now, obviously, we would need to make any adjustments for our own standards, because this is built around Massachusetts standards. But I believe in looking, this is pretty well aligns with what we already have in our Oklahoma academic standards, knowing that we're working on those letter names and phonological advanced phonemic awareness and working on fluency as we get to where we're able to read text. They also have a lot of links here that might be helpful for you, and some different instructional guides. So I'm just going to pull up kindergarten so that we can see that. Whole and small group of each of these. What are these? What do they master? And just some good information, especially if you have some new teachers around that you're trying to figure out what do all of these things mean, or what are some specific supports that we might need for English learners or for our students that are struggling. So these are just, again, some nice resources to be able to delve into. I see something very familiar here about the letters sample spoken sequence. For those of you that are going through letters, it's nice to see the connections of things that we're already familiar with. Idaho has also been putting out recently some instructional routines, and I saw these making the rounds on social media a couple of weeks ago and thought this would be helpful. So they have one on foundational skills and then one on comprehension, which I know we tend to focus a lot on foundational in RSA for good reason. That's usually where our kids are struggling with, but we also need to make sure that we are working on those comprehension skills as well. So just so you see this is it's a brief 7-page document that talks about those different instructional routines. But you'll see they've been named here. There's the focus, and they even have, if I remember correctly, some short videos for each one, so you can see how that's being done.
Blending. I'm going to use Unifix cubes, and I'm going to tap on the top of each cube to represent a sound. Then I'm going to
So you kind of get the idea of how that can be also really helpful from our teachers when we're talking about, let's take a deeper dive into phonemes and how do we work with blending and segmenting. With the comprehension instructional routines, this is a little bit larger document. It's 59 pages, but you'll see a lot of these different routines. It gives you instructions for how to use that, some graphic organizers, and even signal words. This can be really helpful in trying to develop some systematic language across your building or district about how we can address when we're talking about things like author's purpose or making connections. There is a party going on outside my office, apparently. So,
Yeah, there was one over here earlier, so
yeah,
we must have something to celebrate.
So you'll see where it has also routines for large groups, small groups, and even independent practice. So this can be really helpful if you're trying to figure out what do we do for centers, or how do we help specific students, and even some things that we can run off. So it's always nice to see when we've got some other resources that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, that we can pull these up and see how does this fit with the curriculum that we're using, or how is it that I might need to do, maybe with my special ed class, I don't have a curriculum that I have, so I need to pull in some of these small group resources, or my interventions, those types of things. Some of our upcoming professional development. Erin Pazynski, if you are not familiar with her, is in Arkansas, and she is going to be doing a webinar on writing within a structured literacy program. This is focused on early writing skills. This is sponsored by the Reading League Oklahoma, which will be on Tuesday at 6:30. This is a virtual event. It is free to attend, but the recording will be made available to members. There's a registration link. Just be aware that meeting is actually going to start at 6 o'clock. There is an annual meeting for members of the Reading League Oklahoma from 6 to 6:30, but the professional development portion will begin at 6:30. AIM Symposium, AIM Institute for Reading and Language in Pennsylvania, does an annual symposium that they make free every year. It is usually during our spring break, but they also make the recordings available, which makes it nice. But they are focusing this year on reading comprehension. And why is reading comprehension so difficult to comprehend? So it is going to be Monday. It's on Eastern time. So where they say 8:30, it is 7:30 for us. So 7:30 to 2:30. This is a virtual free event. Their guest moderator is Nancy Hennessy. If you will recall, she recently published a book within the last year called The Reading Comprehension Blueprint. Oh, Sharon's holding it up, but yeah, there you go. I know that she and I have been using that quite a lot as we are looking at developing some different professional development for our Oklahoma teachers. And then different speakers would be Hugh Katz, Amy Elliman, Tiffany Hogan, and Lakeisha Johnson. All very well-spoken, a lot of really good information that will be shared there. So use the website for more information, and then the registration link. And then finally, the Oklahoma Literacy Association is having their annual conference on energizing the reading and writing connection on Saturday, April 1st. This will be held in person this year. I know that we're all hungry for in-person opportunities to get together. Dr. Carol Jago will be the keynote presenter, and there will be additional breakout sessions. If you are wanting to present, you have till this Friday to submit an application. I know Sharon can help us get the information for how to do that. There is a cost for this conference, but it does include breakfast and lunch. So you can easily spend that much just on those two meals if you were going out, and then you can enjoy a day of free learning with your meals that you've paid for. So students is $25, members are $50, non-members are $75. It sounds like it's worth joining the Oklahoma Literacy Association and get the price break. There is the registration link right there as well. So, okay, what else has come up, Sharon, in the last moment?
Do you have any advice on when middle of year testing should be? December, January, February?
I kind of went through and looked at some different studies that have been done about that, as far as is there a benefit to testing before or after the holiday break? And there really was not any that had been found. So one or the other, I would say it works best with what you see with your students. If you know that, I know I talked to one principal last week, said they tested before the the holiday break, and everybody was just really loopy and the scores were abysmal, and they did it again after the holiday break and were much better. So it worked out better for them, but we've also seen some that just, they get it done and they feel like they're getting accurate representation for their kids. So I would say December or January would be better, because I know if we wait much past January, then we're really getting so far into the spring semester that by the time that we are able to change any interventions, there's not really a lot of time to have any effect there. Would be just my thoughts on that, but there's nothing really that's set in stone that says you can't.
Okay, and with the Dibbles 8, if you're using Dibbles 8 for dyslexia, you have to use the past, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So let's come back to this. You'll notice on if you're using Acadience, FastBridge, iStation, or Dibbles 8, the past is there because in that legislation, it does require that we attest the skill of advanced phonemic awareness. And those 4 assessments did not demonstrate that they assessed that skill. The past addresses that skill. The past is not in and of itself a screener for characteristics of dyslexia. It only assesses phonological and phonemic awareness, which is one of those critical skills, but we also need the additional information that's included in all of that.
So there's not a phonics screener to do along with the Dibbles 8, but if you're using Dibbles 8 for dyslexia, you also have to do the past, which is a phonological.
Dibbles 8 and the other assessments may have additional subtests that are optional for districts to use, and you are certainly welcome to use that, but it is not a requirement under state law that you do.
If we have a new student in January, should we screen as soon as possible?
Yes. Yeah, and honestly, that's really a best practice anytime you have a new student to go ahead and screen whenever they come in, whether it's October, January, or March, even just so you can kind of have an idea of what's going on with that kiddo so that you can meet their needs as quickly as possible.
Okay, April has a question.
Oh, I see it.
Okay.
Is that applied to students identified with reading difficulties on the beginning of year report? Yes. Okay. So how that's figured on that funding formula, and actually we have it from the November, you can see it's all spelled out right here, how that allocation formula is figured out. So the legislature gives us a pot of money. When we turn in that, we get those beginning of year numbers, we get a total number of students at risk across the state. That number is then divided into that total pot of money to come up with a per pupil allocation. And so then as a district, however many students you turned in that were at risk, that per pupil allocation is multiplied by that number. And that's what you're receiving this year. Can it roll over to next year? Yes, you don't receive this until the middle of the year. And we know that you have startup costs, whether you're paying for interventionists during the first semester, or you're needing to purchase your screening assessment with those funds, or whatever that might be. So yes, that money is deposited in your account. We don't go in and take things out of your account. Okay. All right. Anything else?
I mean, just maybe one more. If they go on an IPRI in the middle of the year,
do you give them the dyslexia screener at
Yes.
that time? Boy, that's a great question, Judy, and that's not one that's been asked yet, and I don't know why. So, and I think it's just as we are implementing something new, we get new questions that we think, oh, we didn't think about that. Right now, the legislation states that the dyslexia screener would occur after the beginning of year assessment. However, I am going to say we do know a lot of schools delayed that with permission, that dyslexia screening until a little bit later. I would say consider if your district did the bulk of their dyslexia screening after the beginning of year, do they have to do that middle of year screening? I'm going to say right now, but I'm going to reserve the right to be told I have to change it if our legal comes back and says that. But I'm going to say no, you would not. However, I would advise it be a really good practice too, because it's really generally just a couple of more subtests for that student that could give you some additional information about how to target their instruction. Okay, so do you have to? Right now, I'm going to say probably not, but it would be a really good idea. But I think that's something that we will probably take to our larger team and get a more firm answer. And then we can also address that in our guidance as we update that for next year so that we can have a really consistent answer. Great question. And yeah, I did. I thank you for whoever caught my typo on the reading leave. Yes, was supposed to be January. Hang on, sorry, not trying to make you seasick as I scroll back to it. There we go. I did change it to January. I think I put June because I was thinking about the something else that's coming up in June, and I was just getting a little ahead of myself. So, all right, well, it is 3 o'clock. I see some people having to get away for car rider lines. Again, we do save the chat. So if we did not get to a question of yours, we will try to make sure that we get to that right away, or that we address that in our next meeting, or if it's something that you just need an immediate answer, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. Also, don't forget, I have put this on our newsletter a couple of times, but we do have a new email address that is going to multiple people. It's at rsa@sde.ok.gov. I'll put that in the chat as well. That way, if, for example, I'm out for a couple of days or happen to be ill or go on vacation, because life happens, Sharon gets a hold of it, Mary Mazariegos gets a hold of it, Dylan can look at it. So we have multiple people that can get to that, and you're not having to just rely on whether life has happened or not to one person. So that way we can work through that. So we are still ourselves getting used to checking that email inbox every day. So please feel free, if you're not getting that answer, just shoot us a message. We'll get there. It's any new process takes a little bit of time, and we always appreciate all of your patience and kind words. So thank you all so much. We hope you have a wonderful start to 2023. It's nice, mild weather, but I think we're going to get a little chillier, so stay warm, and we will talk again soon. We'll see you on February 8th, if not before. Thank you all. Stop that.